Hello. I just really wanted to hop on here. I've realized that I haven't been doing as much kind of communication about personal library science in your common base that I would like to be doing. So I'd like to rectify that a little bit with this video by kind of just giving some of my up to date thinking about personal library science. And then there'll be another video that talks about your common base, which you can see the mobile app version here. But yeah, so I feel like I wanted to start with the what is personal library science because the more that I think about what your common base is, it's basically an R&D software shop for personal library science. And some of these techniques and kind of ideas, I think, transcend the idea of what technology can accomplish. And a lot of them have to deal with information as a concept itself. So I feel like it's worth kind of just running over them and just kind of talking about what each of these mean. And we're going to keep this pretty short. So I'm just going to kind of like run through these core concepts and discuss personal library science and then a day in the life, and we'll finish up there. So, what is personal library science? If you leave with this video with anything, you should really understand the core concepts of personal library science. And the core concept of a personal library science in a lot of ways is a common base, but not necessarily. But it's actually more the 4S functions, which are store, search, synthesis, and share of a person's individual information over the course of their life. So the library of that information creates what's called a common base, which is a data structure of a simple ledger with complex associations. And we can talk about these complex associations, but the way to think about them is largely kind of, vector databases, full text search indexes, kind of just techniques that you put on top of a really simple ledger. And a simple ledger you want to be as simple as possible. So just a data column and a metadata column, ideally. So here are the four functions, a little bit more kind of explained explicitly. Store is to add entries from the outside world to this simple ledger. Searching is finding entries within the ledger from a filter, so like text, for example, or a filter like a tag. Synthesis is the ability to create associations from the entries in the ledger, so being able to take one idea or one entry and another entry and join them together or create something new altogether from them. And then sharing is the exporting of entries into the outside world. I don't necessarily like the word export, but it's not removing from the library. You can kind of copy and paste out the library or cut and paste too, but I think export works. So again, a common base is a data structure of this simple ledger with complex associations subject to these 4S functions: store, search, synthesize, and share. So now let's talk about each word one at a time. Personal library science. So personal is about us. It's about humans. So humans, I would argue, are goalless organisms first and foremost. The way that you can think about this is that when you're raised in a particular culture, and this is kind of a nature versus nurture argument, you start off as kind of a blank slate. You get indoctrinated into certain worldviews as a child, and as you grow up and you're surrounded by the technologies and the culture that you grow up in, and that influences you as a person. And of course, you have your genetic predispositions, which we'll talk about in a second. But I would argue that when you start life and as you go through life, even and as you chase your curiosities, we're largely goalless creatures. Like we have sub goals, which can be very specific. So a sub goal of being able to finish college, or a sub goal of getting a job, or a sub goal of eating a sandwich. But overall, the organism that we are is a goalless organism. It just has a list of goals that happen in that goalless ocean, perhaps. Then we have attraction, indifference, and repulsion. I would argue that curiosity is just a repeated version of attraction. It's an attraction to the same subject over and over. But basically, attraction, indifference, and repulsion are how you feel about things that happen in your life. You might be attracted to paleontology, but not attracted to science class. You might be attracted to a particular person and indifferent towards a lot of other people in your life. You might be repulsed by the idea of something that misaligns with your values. And then attention is really important too. It's just kind of what your life is in a simple way, is the things that you pay attention to. So we'll get here later when we get some moments. But attention is basically the idea of you're looking at something and you're staring at it intently and you commit it to your memory. So your whole world of your past and your present is made up of the things that you've paid attention to. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have a memory of it. So then, as humans too, as a social species, as a species that uses language and mathematics and abstract concepts, we are consumers and processors of information. And this is important because we're processors because we can create new pieces of information, and we're consumers because we can consume information and create or understand concepts from other people. And this is really important later, I think, especially as it applies to the kind of library aspect of personal library science, which, speaking of a library, so I think I wanted to start this kind of like, a library is a pretty straightforward thing. Most of us have been in a library at some point in our lives, but I would start at the level of a book. I think a book is an array of sentences. So basically, if you take a book and you just split it at each period or question mark or exclamation point, what you get is a list of sentences. So a library is basically a 2D array of sentences with strong and weak associations for those things. So fiction sentences versus nonfiction sentences versus sentences about World War II or sentences about, Harry Potter. All of those are kind of strong associations within the books themselves, but also within the umbrella that we put them under, which are kind of ontological systems for information. This is the second thing that I think is more relevant to the library, is that everything is patterns in the universe, especially the engineered things that are engineered by humans. So language, for example, like concepts, words, the order of the letters matter. Listen and silent have the same letters, but they are different concepts. Because syntax matters. Engineering blueprints, this kind of scales to the real world in the sense that, the house that you're in started off as a blueprint. The car that you drive started off as a blueprint. And these blueprints started in the minds of people, and they take them and then they bring them into the real world with execution. Even nature uses patterns. I mean, think of Fibonacci spirals. Think of the way that DNA is self-similar. A lot of nature relies on patterns for things to work and be consistent at the biological level, but even at the physics level with atoms and kind of like what we know about, the relationship between molecules and atoms. And then finally, science. So if we have personal, which is again this goalless organism, we have a library, which is a 2D array of sentences. Let's just call it for books or make it simple, but this works for audio too. It also works for video. Because video is just an array of frames and audio is just an array of sounds, right? And then we have science. So science is basically the idea of like, if we can agree that in our library we can store things, we can search things in our library, we can synthesize things from our library, taking some ideas and making a new thing, and we can share things out of our library, then some strategies of store, search, synthesize, and share are going to be better or worse at effectiveness. So being able to understand the effective level of each strategy is a great place to get started to figure out what kind of science that we're trying to conduct here and what we're trying to fix for. And basically, the best strategies are generalizable. And we can talk about this later with the implementation of your common base, but largely it's going to be semantic search over tags whenever possible, full text search because of the way that human language works, etc., etc. And then there's quick capture for store is another kind of generalizable technique. And for synthesize, commentary and marginalia are generalizable. But these are things that I can talk about later. I'm trying to make this video relatively short, even though I've been thinking about this personal library science for well over a year or two even. So again, a common base is the core data structure for a personal library. It's not the only structure in a personal library. And in fact, there's a lot of structures that are more personal than they are science. So you can almost imagine that there's a push and pull between the structures that are kind of like generalized structures that work in every single case versus kind of like the idiosyncratic structures. And even though the ledger itself becomes highly idiosyncratic, that's why we have these complex associations, is because my ledger is going to look entirely different than your ledger. And the way to understand that is that we want a collaborative effort between humans and computers because we're both weak and strong at different things. A computer is really good at computation, deterministic computation, and a human is really good at paying attention to things and kind of deciding what that attention should do or what it should mean on top of something. So I think the best way to understand that is to kind of just like really quickly run through a day of the life, and then we'll finish up here with a conclusion. Is that the day in the life of a person is basically a list of moments, right? You wake up and things are happening to you, and you're thinking about things that you want to do in the world in accordance to those things that are happening. If it's cold, you bring a jacket. If it's raining, you bring an umbrella. But your choices are limited and structured by the moments that you are introduced to. You pay attention to certain things, and you're indifferent to other things, and you're repulsed by some things. So this attention is the kind of creation of these sub goals in these moments. However, let's say, for example, we want to narrow it to the idea that you and I have decided to read the same book for an hour, and we're reading the exact same chapter, but alone in our brains, and then we have to highlight the sentences that stick out to us. I would be willing to bet that at the end of that chapter reading, we have different highlights. And, the question might be, well, why do we have different highlights? We both were reading the same book, and it's because we're different people. We pay attention to different things. We have different goals that we're kind of keeping an eye on in our own curiosity and our own individual makeups. But computers are good at deterministic computation. So they're good at taking 1 and 0 and kind of just moving down a register in a list, but they're really fast at it. So the trick is to find techniques that allow us to use computers to take some of the things that are not enjoyable to do for humans and turn them into tasks that a computer can do. So we'll finish this video here. So I'll wrap it up so it's not too long. But in the other video, we will be talking about your common base as an application and how it's a dialect of personal library science. Oh my God, my video just froze because I did a thumbs up. That's crazy. Whatever, let's just finish strong. So a common base is a data structure with a simple ledger and complex associations on that ledger, subject to the 4S functions: store, search, synthesize, and share. If you remember nothing, remember this. A person is a goalless organism with subgoals. A library is an array of sentences in like for the case of text, and again for videos it's frames. Everything is patterns, so everything can be turned into a pattern, and those patterns can be extracted into different things. When we agree that there's only 4 things that you can really do with a library, which is to store, search, synthesize, and share information into it, you have to recognize that some strategies are better and worse, and that we should generalize whenever possible. And then create a collaborative effort between people and computers. So I'll be back for the second video. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.